Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Elevenses. It's the 26th of July. We're almost at the end of the middle month of summer. A bit of a bright day today, not so good yesterday after a reasonably dry start. So what have we got for you today? Well, show packed with some news, yet more updates on the driving test situation, some reports on bike sales in June. Interesting one on the call for adaptive pricing for charging electric vehicles. We'll talk about Ride Free, which is a new pre-CBT online training scheme. We'll have a look at the new ECE helmet standards and how they might make bolt-on Bluetooth intercoms illegal. And we'll round off with today's better biking tip, which is all about eye contact and why it's a faulty concept and every rider should forget it. So don't forget, if you've got anything to say, drop me a line. I will get back to you at the end of the show. Comments, questions, always welcome. Feedback on the show itself, yes, love to hear it. And if you've got any suggestions for a future show, do drop me a line. Right, okay, so what's going on out there in the world at the moment? Well, learner motorcyclists are still waiting to take their tests up and down the country. The latest news comes from Northern Ireland, where riders are still waiting to take tests more than 2 weeks after they were supposed to have resumed. The plans to restart rider training, it should have kicked off on the 6th of July. It was announced by the Department of Infrastructure back in June. But emails to learners from the Driving and Vehicle Agency, which is the organisation responsible for bike tests in Northern Ireland, said on the 21st of July that bike testing had not yet recommenced. Emails said that people waiting for tests would be contacted when these tests resume. And Infrastructure Minister Nicola Mallon has said that she hopes to give a time frame for resumption of practical driving tests for cars next week. So again, we've got no idea when these bike tests will actually restart. She was talking to a TV show called Good Morning Ulster on Friday and said basically her department is examining risk assessments in England and the Republic of Ireland in order to manage the resumption of tests in Northern Ireland. And she said that she hoped to be able to give more clarity around testing next week. And she said that the DVA are working with the unions and staff. We're watching very closely resumption of practical tests in other places. That doesn't actually quite match up with the statements from the Department of Infrastructure, which said that initial test appointments are prioritised for key workers, and that other customers who'd paid their fee already would be contacted shortly. A spokesman for the DFI, in fact, said waiting times for motorcycle tests vary across test centres, but based on current demand, the next available appointment should be in early August. Well, it doesn't quite match up with the not having restarted. Anyway, so there are a number of people who are not very happy about this, including a Matthew Chambers from Lisbon. He paid the DVA fee of £35 for his test on the 1st of July, the day that the payment line reopened, and he said he's still waiting for his test almost a month later. He described the situation as a shambles, and he said he called the DVA helpline on the 20th of July. That was the day before the DVA sent out the email, and the person that he spoke to said that he thought tests were up and running and that they don't seem to know what's going on. The departments involved don't seem to be communicating with each other. However, there is one positive note. On the 8th of July, the DFI did announce a 6-month extension to off-road motorcycle test pass certificates, the Module 1 test, which expired before the 31st of October to help mitigate the impact of these coronavirus restrictions on learners. But that's Northern Ireland only. Here on mainland Britain, the DVSA have confirmed, and they did this on Thursday after my last show, that expired theory test certificates will not be extended, despite growing concern in the rider and driver training industry about the impact on pupils and the delays in resuming this anything like a full schedule of driving tests. Remember that they are running fewer tests, I think 5 instead of 7 per day. because of coronavirus restrictions. And the reasons that the DVSA have given is that it's because of fears over road safety issues of allowing pupils whose theory knowledge could be over 2 years out of date to sit a practical test. Well, some of these trainees might be taking their theory test almost 2 years before their driving test. Their theory test expires. How is it in any sense or form or shape that their theory test is adequate 1 year, 11 months and 30 days before the expiry and isn't adequate 1 day after that? The whole thing is nonsensical. It's a nonsense excuse. If it was 5 years out of date or 10 years out of date, fair enough, but just extending it for a few more weeks hardly seems to me to be a real, genuine concern. They also claim that it needs a change of regulations to achieve that extension. Well, they managed to do it with the MOT certificate quickly enough. And DVSA are saying there is a lack of ministerial appetite to seek regulatory changes at this time, which is possibly true. The NASP, I must find out what that actually stands for, but basically it's one of the organisations involving driver and rider trainers. They've responded by highlighting their deep concern, and they've proposed solutions which could have helped avoid this logjam situation where people are struggling to reschedule tests. It's particularly difficult, of course, for motorcyclists because there are 3 tests involved. There is the theory test, the Module 1 off-road test, and then the Module 2 on-road test. And what a lot of rider trainers are still finding is that there are Mod 2 tests, not very many, but they are available if you look, but they can't get any Mod 1 tests. So anybody without a Mod 1 test already is, not to put too fine a point on it, stuffed. Right, okay, you are watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses Live. We have more stories coming up for you. I'm going to be talking about adaptive pricing for electric vehicles, Ride Free, a new CBT, pre-CBT online training scheme, helmet regulations, which could make Bluetooth intercoms illegal. And we'll finish off with a better biking tip about eye contact and why you should forget it. But first of all, bike sales. I've been talking about this again in the past a few weeks, but a boom in scooter sales has actually helped the UK motorcycle market return to growth. It's actually up a few percent. Now, compare that with the car market. New car market is down 35%, not entirely surprisingly. But in June, 13,000 motorcycles plus were registered, and that's a rise of 14.8% over 2019. Obviously, some of those sales are sort of deferred purchases from the lockdown period, but what it really shows is that people are looking to motorcycles as an alternative form of transport, as I pretty much predicted. Sales of scooters were up 43%, and the industry trade body says that they believe that this growth is coming mostly from people who don't want to use public transport but cannot cycle or walk, as has been suggested by the government and other bodies. And they're very frustrated that the government and ministers continue to push these green alternatives to public transport whilst ignoring the role of motorcycles and scooters for those with longer commutes. Okay, they still trot out the usual debatable clean and efficient mode of transport. Well, if you've got an electric bike, then perhaps, but a petrol engine motorcycle, if it's a big CC bike, really isn't economical. It's really no better than a car. Also, there's a dubious line about taking up little road space. Well, that's not strictly true. If you are following at a sensible distance, remember the 2-second rule, you are at exactly the same distance behind another motorcycle as a car would be behind you. So the only saving is actually the fact that the motorcycle is slightly shorter. Have a think about that and think about how you can fit more motorcycles onto the road. Yes, you can stagger across the lane, but you still need to maintain safe distance. And you can only get 2 people on a bike. You could conceivably get 4 or 5 in a car. So some of these arguments that are constantly trotted out are dubious. However, they're right about bikes being parked with little space necessary. They park more densely, and they do meet the needs of a commuters whilst they do fulfil their social distancing. The government's message not to use public transport is clearly benefiting scooter and motorcycle sales, said Stephen Latham, who's the head of the National Motorcycle Dealers Association. He says that scooter and motorcycle retailers are optimistic they're in a good position to benefit from the gradual return to work as lockdown measures continue to ease. I suspect it will be more to do with people thinking about a cheap form of transport than anything else, because the best-selling motorcycle in June was, not surprisingly, Honda's PCX 125. Okay, don't forget, you can still head over to my Lulu page and you can find my books, which are available to purchase on order. There are a couple of ebooks over there as well. You can download immediately if you're interested. What we still have to come is I'm going to be talking about the new ECE helmet standards, and we'll round off with today's better biking tip, which is about the concept of eye contact and why I think you should forget it. But before we get that far, let's have a think about electric charging for electric vehicles. Now, I've mentioned over the last few weeks that several electric motorcycle manufacturers have seen surges in sales as people begin to think about plugging in their bikes rather than filling them with petrol. But I've also been saying for many years that the current cheap cost of electricity for your electric motorcycle is unsustainable. As more electric vehicles pull power from the grid, then more infrastructure needs to be put in place, and that needs to be paid for. And the other thing that's often forgotten is that governments raise huge amounts of their income by taxing fossil fuels, and that income has to be replaced. And the first sign that I've seen that this is actually being considered comes from some research from the University of Cologne, which says that what adaptive pricing is needed to ensure what they're talking about is grid stability as the need for electric vehicles increases. And what they've produced is a report called The Pricing Scheme, and that's been written by Professor Wolf Ketter and co-authors Konstantina Valorgiana and John Collins and Dmitry Zadanov. And their model is based, they say, on real-world data. So they are adapting their customer responses and market conditions to the grid. Now, what the grid has to do is it has to balance the production with the consumption. So basically, the problem that you're probably aware of, you may well have heard all this before, half-time in sort of World Cup final, everybody dashes out and switches the electric kettle on and causes a huge dip in the power voltage and frequency. If somebody wasn't there ready to push a button and bring more power online instantly. The same happens at the adverts halfway through Coronation Street, apparently. So there are times where the grid has to be specially bumped up to deal with extra demand. And the problem will be if everybody gets back from work at sort of 6 or 7 o'clock or whatever and plugs their electric car and electric motorcycle in, then suddenly there'll be a big demand for extra power. And if they don't get that right, the frequency of the power that goes through the grid rises or falls. And then what can happen is that you damage electrical devices, and even generators can apparently be damaged by this fluctuation. So what they're saying is that a transition to electric vehicles is widely assumed to be an important step along the road to environmental sustainability. However, large-scale adoption of electric vehicles may put grids under critical strain. So what they're saying basically is that we should be using what's called adaptive pricing. In other words, if you think about the, what is it called, Economy 7, the cheap overnight power, which means your upstairs neighbour puts their washing machine on at 1 o'clock, which then drums away through the ceiling while you're trying to sleep. That's exactly the kind of thing they're thinking about for charging your electric vehicle. When there is relatively little demand, power can be cheap. When there is more demand, power can be expensive, and then people will move either way to take up the cheaper power. And there are lots and lots of different ways you can do this. But one of the obvious things is that the car itself could have a chip in it quite easily, which will identify it as an electric vehicle. So could your electric bike, and that would tell the charging system what you're charging, and then you could be charged differentially for your vehicle. And basically their research says that this adaptive pricing scheme shows robust results. That's what they're saying, and makes it preferable to current pricing schemes. And it will distribute that peak demand. Okay, so all right. Don't forget, you can catch up with Elevenses at 11 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays and Sundays. I'll be back on Wednesday with another show. Still to come, I will be talking about helmet standards, and I'll be looking at eye contact and why it's a faulty concept and we should forget it. But first of all, something new from the DVSA. You probably know, if you have done anything to do with bike training, that nothing much has changed in motorcycle training for quite a while now. CBT actually came in 1990, although it's been reviewed a couple of times and there have been some minor tweaks. One of the tweaks being to make it client-centered, which means basically you do everything that you would normally do, but you tell the client they're doing it to keep them happy rather than what you're told to do. Sorry, I sound a bit cynical there, don't I? But I really do think that the DVSA's adoption of client-centered training is anything but. But anyway, what they brought in for pre-CBT riders is something called Ride Free. And this is a new online motorcycle training scheme. Basically, it's a free online course that you should take before you actually begin your moped or motorcycle CBTs. The DVSA announced the launch of Ride Free just a couple of days ago, much to the surprise of most bike trainers who've never heard of it. Now, I admit that I had come across it peripherally, or tangentially, perhaps is a better word. I was doing some work for the Transport and Road Research Laboratory, Transport Research Lab, last year as a consultant, and I came across a scheme that was being run by Transport for London, which is basically where this particular Ride Free scheme came from. It was then trialled in the east of England. It was taken up by the Highways England, apparently, and the DVSA, put out to a number of training schools out in the east of England who trialled it, and they gave it a thumbs up. So it's now being rolled out online to the entire country. So the idea is it prepares riders for a lifetime of safe riding. Sounds good, doesn't it? So what does it contain? Well, 5 online modules. The highway code and hazard perception, clothing, equipment, and the importance of maintenance. That was always part of the CBT, and how a road rider's behavior can affect them and other users. Okay, some of those parts were originally, well, still are in the CBT. So to get onto this course, you need to create an account on the Safe Driving for Life website. And Mark Wynne, who's the Chief Driving and Riding Examiner for the DVSA, said, as motorcyclists are amongst the most vulnerable road users, it's essential they have the right knowledge and skills needed to stay safe on Britain's roads. Getting the right advice from a professional instructor and the new free Ride Free course helps new riders get the most from their CBT and should improve road safety. The MCIA are also involved, and they say they are proud to be part of the initiative. And the course actually won a Prince Michael of Kent International Road Safety Award, the same award that our Biker Down course in Kent was awarded a few years back. And they've also got a Chartered Institution of Highways and Transport Road Safety Award too. Okay, that's being rolled out as of now. Will anybody do it? Good question. I doubt that many people have heard of it, and if all they tell, of course, are people who are already involved in training, it's unlikely new riders will come across it. So there needs to be a big push to get people out with something like this. Okay. New helmet standards. Now, you may not know about this, but the ECE 2205 standard, that's the label that you've almost certainly got on the back of your helmet, is being upgraded. The new standard is going to add a lot of new tests to the ones that are currently done to the helmets. At the moment, the helmets are hit head, sort of full on. Basically, you drop an anvil shape onto a helmet and sees what happens. You look to see whether the shell survives the impact or whether it splits. You look at the transmitted force that goes through the shell and the liner into a sort of a fake skull, which is on the inside of the helmet. But one of the things that's become obvious from research on injuries in crashes, motorcycle crashes where a head impact is concerned, is that a lot of the injuries are rotational. So the new test will actually drop these weights on the edges of the helmet, so that basically a spin is put on the helmet to see what happens, to see how much force is transmitted to the skull by a twisting way. It's been associated with a lot of serious brain injuries, actually, because what happens is the skull itself moves, but the brain actually, a bit like a jelly in a bowl. If you wobble a bowl with a jelly in it, the jelly shakes quite violently, often tears around the edge, and that's exactly what can happen with the brain. So these rotational shear injuries are very important, and so it's interesting to see what will happen. There are a number of ways that helmets might be modified to reduce impact, which includes a liner which actually shears on the inside of the helmet rather than your head, basically, your skull. So they will add those tests, but one of the things they're also going to check for is how helmets perform with and without accessories. And this means things like Bluetooth radios. Now, some of the Bluetooth radios are tucked neatly away into the shell, but they do that at the cost of removing lining from the shell. Some others are fitted around the back of the helmet, around the neck area. But the helmets to date have always been tested minus the accessories. They will now be tested with any of accessories that the manufacturer provides, and they will have to be tested and approved to gain this ECE homologation. And what that means is that it's possible, if the regulations are read as some people are reading them, that third-party communications units, third-party visors, cameras, anything else that you stick on your helmet, if you want to have a Mohican on the top of it, they could all void the ECE certification of your helmet. Now, the question is, of course, exactly how this rule would be enforced, because obviously it will impact the aftermarket accessories industry quite heavily. The problem is that if you only allow the manufacturer approved Bluetooth intercoms and Bluetooth cameras and all the rest of it, all the other things, you can get cameras which actually fit inside the lining of the helmet already. You're making hay, or certainly making money for the manufacturer, because they can do what they already do, which is charge a vast amount of cash for a few pennies worth of electronics. The internals on a typical Bluetooth intercom, basically don't cost more than a few pounds, which is how the Chinese can manufacture a Bluetooth intercom at a fraction of the price that the mainstream manufacturers do over in Europe. Same with cameras. You can buy, an expensive GoPro camera, or you can get something that does almost exactly the same job for a fraction of the price from a Chinese manufacturer. But if you lock people in to a particular manufacturer, you are going to send the price of these accessories through the roof. It's absolutely guaranteed, in my opinion. Right, okay. Don't forget, if you do enjoy these shows, you can head over to my coffee page, and you will find something of the order of 150 articles already up on the website from my Facebook days. I have a huge archive of Facebook articles which nobody can read because they are buried deep in the past. So I've been digging them out and adding them to coffee. over there. 2014 and the half of 2015 are already up, and I've got several more years to go. So you can join the fun over there for as little as £3 for a month's access, or if you sign up for a subscription, again, as little as £3 a month, you get access as long as your subscription's valid, and you can also get access to some more specialist material too. Right, okay, the sort of thing that I talk about over there is the problems of something like eye contact. Now, eye contact is one of these tips which is given to riders. You'll find it littering the road safety literature. Riders should make eye contact with drivers. We ought to ask why, and then we ought to think about how it works, and then we ought to think perhaps we should forget it altogether. Now, listen to this. It was written for an online magazine style website, and it was in a series about how to avoid common crashes. Now, not surprisingly, that particular article started with the "sorry mate, I didn't see you" Smidsy collision, which happens when a vehicle turns into a motorcycle's path at a junction. And this particular statement leapt out, to quote, "The number of drivers who have pulled out while I've been maintaining eye contact with them while wearing a clear visor is very worrying. The shock in the face of the driver is the scariest thing to me. It means that the person looked to the right, made full eye contact with me, and still pulled out while I was sounding my horn and taking evasive action. Frightening stuff." Now, just think about that for a moment. He says that enough drivers have pulled out while he's been maintaining eye contact for it to be very worrying. Now, does that suggest anything to you? Does it suggest perhaps that making eye contact is actually a faulty strategy? Maybe it's the eye contact strategy that isn't working. So if the rider keeps making eye contact and it doesn't work, why keep trying? Why not ask some questions? Why isn't this working, and why keep bothering about it? And in particular, why write about it as a technique for avoiding collisions at junctions? The shock in the face of the driver, he wrote, that's a clue. That shock is because that's the moment that the driver actually spotted the bike, not when the rider thought he had eye contact with the driver. It was the moment that driver suddenly saw the bike, and that expression on his face is the expression because he suddenly realized that there is a motorcycle there that he hadn't spotted. Okay, now watch drivers at junctions. What you'll often see is that they are looking to their right, and then suddenly their head will snap, and then they'll track us with their gaze. And it's that head snap that actually tells us that they've seen us. That's the moment that driver has actually become aware that there is actually a motorcycle in his field of view. And I say really does look at us because eye contact itself is an entirely faulty concept. It's simply not how the eye works. The eye's foveal zone, that's the part of the visual field that gives us the clear and sharply focused colour vision that we need to identify objects that are around us, is just a few degrees across. And you can test this for yourself very easily. Just hold your thumb up at arm's length, look at your thumbnail, and then look at your top knuckle. Even though the distance between them is just that, you'll find that you need to move your eyes to refocus. And that's the clue about eye contact and why it doesn't work. We have to refocus. Now, remember, there is a second problem here too. It's not just that tiny, tiny field of clear color vision. The eye has depth of field too. Just like a camera. If you are focusing on my head, and in my little mini studio here, my background scene there is slightly out of focus. If you look at the background scene, my head is slightly out of focus in your view. So we have this depth of field, and we cannot focus on two things that are at different distances. Think how hard it is if you've got a digital camera to take a picture of something like, I was trying to take a photograph of a butterfly the other day, and it was in the middle of a load of long stems. There were stems in front of it, stems behind it, and it was sitting on a flower. And I couldn't get the camera to focus on the butterfly itself. It was either focusing on the stems in front or the stems behind. And this is the problem that a driver has looking at a stream of traffic. He is focusing on objects at different distances. So Basically, the problem is here that in the case of a motorcycle, which you know is thin and narrow, versus a car, which is wide and fat, that the motorcycle could be just in front of a car. And so what's filling the guy's vision is not the motorcycle in front of the car, but the car behind. And that's what he's focused on. So the driver can appear to be looking in our direction, but actually be focused on the vehicle behind us, possibly even something that's just in front of us. And and that's why eye contact really doesn't work. We can't, all we can say is that the driver is looking in our direction. And there was a second piece of faulty advice here, which he said, as with all advanced riding, the key to avoiding a SMIDSI starts with your observations and keeping an eye on the left-hand side of the road where there is a junction there or not, to look out for potential danger. Well, actually, advanced riding starts with having the right knowledge. Without the right knowledge, everything else is a failure. It's no good having great observation skills if you don't know where you are looking for a problem. The author is absolutely right in that most collisions do happen with a car that pulls out from the near side, but he is totally wrong in assuming that that's the only place we need to look. Unless that road is a one-way street, there is a second hazard. And it's a pretty obvious one when you think about it, and that's the oncoming car turning into that junction across the rider's path. Now, that crash is not nearly so common as the classic SMIDSI with the vehicle that pulls out into the rider's path. But the car that turns across your path, that is by far and away the bigger crash when it happens to you, and it kills a significant number of riders. I did a bike safe in London about 2001, 2002. And the stats that the Met Police handed out on that course were quite scary, because I discovered that that particular crash killed almost half of all motorcyclists in London in 1 year. And that's the car turning across your path from the opposing direction, remember. Many, many, many more than cars that pull out from the near side. That was about 1 in 12. So know your crashes. I can't be too critical of the writer for not knowing this, because basically we don't give that information to riders at an early enough stage in their development. You won't find it in any of the advanced riding guides. In fact, it wasn't in my advanced training until I got those stats from the police. And then I have made it a point of adding it to all my riding courses, urban riding courses, rural road riding courses, wherever. I make sure people know about the risks from both directions. So, why don't we know about this crash? Well, as I said, the fatality rate is high. It's a rare crash, but it kills a lot of riders. So many of those riders who do have the crash, they won't come back to tell their mates in the pub about the numpty driver who just pulled out on them. So remember, two things here, two takeaways. Forget eye contact. The best that you can say is that you are looking to see whether a driver is actually looking in your general direction. If he is, there is a chance he might have seen you. I put it at no higher than a chance. But if he's looking the other way, he definitely hasn't seen you. So that's all you can use your line of sight to the driver for. Forget eye contact. It is absolutely useless. It doesn't help you and it doesn't help the driver. Assume that you haven't been seen is far safer than thinking that driver's seen me because he's made eye contact. And secondly, never ever forget that vehicles turn into as well as out of side turnings, driveways, pub car parks, service roads, fields, farm tracks, you name it. Anywhere a vehicle can turn in, one can turn out, but watch for that turning in more than anything. Okay, right, we're done for the day. Don't forget, we will be back with another show on Wednesday. It will be a recorded one, actually, because I'm going to be taking a couple of days holiday. I'll try and get some holiday in one out while everything's reasonably quiet on the coronavirus front. So I will record a show for you. It will be on at 11 o'clock, but I won't be live to chat to you. So thank you very much for watching once again. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Don't forget, if you do have any comments, drop me a line now. I will be getting back to you online in just a few seconds. So, all right, hopefully see you Wednesday, and then I'll be live again in a week's time on the following Sunday. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now from Kevin Williams here with Elevenses.